Hello everyone and welcome back. We are mixing it up a little bit here today. As you can see, I am not in my office. I'm in the van. I intended, when I bought this van in December, I intended to be on the road most of the time in the van, doing my blurb job from the road, and then whatever else I could pull off in addition. All of that is out the window with COVID, but that's okay. I think all of us have to redefine patience during this time, and I hope everybody out there is doing okay with it. Today's Q&A is about print, about printing in general. It could be about Blurb, it could be about any other printing service. A little history. I think I made my first darkroom prints in the late 80s. And I, like a lot of other photographers, when that image came up in the developer for the first time, I knew what kind of trouble I was in because I was so hooked on that idea and that process. Printing images just took over my life in the strangest of ways. I've mentioned this before. I had a scholarship to a different college to go in a different direction in my life. And really, the second I saw that image come up in the developer, I took that whole opportunity and just tossed it out and turned right and became a photographer. So if you had any idea or any question about my mental capacity, you will now know that I have a fundamental and tragic flaw, that I chose photography over geology. Okay, maybe not. I reached out on YouTube and asked people to send in printing questions, and they're fun. I like printing questions because I've been doing this for so long. I think there's a lot of things that I sort of take for granted that other people might get stuck with or struggle with or have just never encountered before. So we're going to start there. I have a lot. There's no way I can get through all these. What I'm going to do is monitor the clock, and hopefully the camera is not going to die. Yesterday, the camera just kept turning off by itself. And I don't mean just stop recording. I mean turning off by itself. So you know my luck with cameras. I'm hoping it doesn't happen today. But I'm actually going to take the first question asked first and then go to the last question, if that makes sense, for no particular reason. First question came in from Aaron, who I haven't seen or talked to for quite some time other than brief little snippets online here and there. Aaron had a question. I haven't printed with Blurb in quite a while, but I was wondering about the binding options. Do they have a true case binding option? So we have three primary binding options. We have library bind, perfect bind, and saddle stitch, depending on what it is you're getting. But we also have a division that is the best kept secret in the professional photography world. I'm not really sure why so few people seem to know about this, but Blurb has a division called large order services. We do custom high volume offset books, and we have for years, but for some reason the photo community has either missed our marketing, or maybe we're not doing a good enough job marketing the fact that we have this division. One of the entertaining things that I do is when I do talks and lectures pre-COVID, I always bring with me a giant set of sample books. And I like to bring large order services books because they're custom. They have foil stamp, deboss, emboss, printed end sheets, placeholder ribbons, checkerboard head and foot bands, etc., stuff like that, slip cases. And photographers will always walk up, publishing people will always walk up and pick them up and say, well, these aren't Blurb books. And I always make a joke about, oh yeah, I'm bringing books from other printers. Yes, they are Blurb books, and most people are surprised when they see them. So in addition to our entire POD operation, print on demand, we have offset. So if you're looking for a custom book, you can also go that route. That was a good question, Aaron. Okay, the next question is, could you briefly describe the different papers, etc., uncoated pearl, and your recommendations? I'm glad someone asked this right off the bat because this is a very tricky question. I have probably received this question over 1,000 times over the past, I don't know how many years. I can make suggestions or recommendations about paper, but the tricky part about paper is it's subjective. So for example, Blurb has a standard paper. This is for photo books only. Standard paper, a line of premium papers, and then a line of ProLine papers. And in terms of quality, you would start with standard, go to premium, and then go to ProLine. But depending on the project and your budget and the goal and the item you're making and the price point, the paper that might make the most sense is the standard paper. And also in terms of coating and on surface, for example, the ProLine papers, which are at the top, there's a coated version called Pearl, and there's an uncoated version. One is not better than the other. They're just totally different. They will hold different amounts of ink. You will get different blacks. You will get different contrast, different saturation, and also a different texture and weight to the paper. Paper can be alarmingly complicated if you allow it to be. The number one thing I can suggest is to order a swatch kit from Blurb, and secondly is to do some testing. And when you do a test book, you don't necessarily have to design your entire book and do this giant 12 by 12, 200-page book and run a test. Why not do a 20-page softcover version of your book, of a sample of the work that's in there, and then just fire that off and have it printed on different papers to get your opinion of what your work looks like on the papers. I'm going to say this over and over on this particular Q&A. There is no substitute for making tests. I wish you could print just a sample of a book and test it that way, but you can't. The best way to do a test book is to just order a small softcover version of what you're doing, but there is no substitute. And for some reason, I find there's a lot of people that have a reluctance to do testing when it comes to bookmaking. They'll test like crazy with their cameras and their software and go into the field. But when it comes to making a book, even folks who've never made a book before will often say, well, I don't want to have to make a test book. And my question back to them is always, what happens in the creative world, art, illustration, design, etc., that doesn't come through revision? Everything good, a novelist doesn't sit down and bang out a final draft the first time they sit down to write. They do the first draft, the second draft, the third draft. It's being continually edited through revision. And that's what really good bookmaking is about. Okay, this is another great question. This is from Ibrahim. I get overwhelmed with having to choose a few out of the billions of photos I take. How do you choose from them all? Also, how do you decide what stories to tell, especially when photographs don't seem to relate one another? So, Ibrahim, this is a tricky question, but I'm gonna give you my opinion. I think when digital photography arrived, wait a second. I don't think when digital photography arrived, I know when digital photography arrived. Photographers began to accumulate exponentially more images than they did in the film era. It was easy. It was unlimited. You had flashcards, boom, you filled it up. There was no penalty. There was no cost per exposure, even though there was, but on the surface, it really didn't seem like that. Having billions of images, millions of images, even hundreds of thousands of images can be an absolute massive problem. Not only in the fact that you have to edit, but you also have to store all these images. And this is the white elephant in the photography, especially the digital photography space, is archiving. Everybody is very nonchalant about this. They all want to throw out some easy solution. Put it in the cloud. Well, if you have 50 to 100 terabytes of data, putting that in the cloud is no easy task. And then you need redundancy in the cloud, and then you have to pay for it all. So my point to you is when you're capturing in the field, there is no good reason to overshoot scenes, because editing digital files like on a laptop screen or an iPad screen is not easy for anyone. Good things get missed. You're looking at tiny thumbnails. People get lazy. So I am very, very cautious in the field when I make photographs, especially when I know I'm going to print. I try to shoot digital the same way that I shoot film. And I'm very selective. I don't overshoot because I have the ability to do so. I think the downside outweighs the upside. Also, I had training. I spent 4 years in photography school, and a big part of that was learning how to edit and sequence your work. And so I've been practicing this now since about 1990. God knows how many years that is. It's way too many. It sounds impossible, like nothing existed in 1990. Miami Vice was already over, and most of the good things in the world had already been discovered, and so now we are where we are. So I learned how to edit, I learned how to sequence, I learned how to control myself in the field. But the number one point I can make to you is practice. You have to edit. So when you do a shoot, think about things like completing a shoot and then saying, what are the 10 single most important images to this project? What are the top 5? And what is the single best photograph I made? And do that each time you go out. And when you think about a book historically, which is a tricky thing to say, but historically, if you're going to think about a book of photographs, maybe think about 50 as a range. And again, there's every exception to this rule 1,000 times over. But maybe think about 50 pictures from a project that you've worked on for a long, long time. Having said that, you could do a book from a single image. I've been thinking and dreaming about doing this for years, doing a series of books based on a single image, which I will never have time for. So hopefully one of you will steal that idea and do it. Okay, great. Another great question here. Pavel, Pawel. What's the best way to promote a zine when you're not on social media? Great question. Number one would be an email newsletter. If you have a website that is all your own, and you have a blog that is all your own, and you develop a voice and a style and an actual audience of people, the next logical step is an email newsletter. I got a really good one today from a photographer named Catherine Lutenegger, who I interviewed back in Australia a couple of years ago. She's a European-based photographer. I want to say she's Swiss. Her email is amazing. Michael Clark here in Santa Fe is another photographer that has the most mind-blowing newsletter I've seen. That is a very, very strategic way of marketing a zine. I know for certain if AG23 is the zine that I'm involved in with Beyond Clothing. And I think if we had, in a perfect world, if we had international distribution at an affordable price, which is not easy right now. It is incredibly difficult to do that. If we'd had that, we could have sold out the zine literally, probably, I think, in a week or so, 2,000 copies, just based on email newsletters and word of mouth. I mean, it really would have gone that fast because I'm not a big fan of social. I don't want to do social. I don't really want to talk about the zine on social. I'd much rather do films like this and talk about it. Let's see. Getting ready to do my first show at a local coffee shop. How much importance do you place on the finishing touches of printing, such as mounting, matting, and framing? I can see it would be very easy to overdo it from a cost standpoint and easily price myself out of sales, but I also want a high quality end product. How do you find the right balance? Balance is the key word. It depends on the content of the work, the scope of the work, and the seriousness of the work. And I think the installation is hugely important when it ties into the overall project. You wouldn't go do a quick sort of informal project and then necessarily turn around and spend a fortune on high level, beautiful, hand done framing. It may not make sense. You may not even use frames at all. And so it really depends on the scope of the project, the scale of the project, the seriousness of it, and what your eventual delivery tactic is for that. I've seen exhibitions where the images were printed on self-adhesive vinyl and put on the floor of the gallery. So when you walked in, you were actually standing on the images. There is a million things to do. My advice to you is to forget everything you know about photography, forget everything you know about bookmaking, and this goes to everyone who is listening to this film. Forget what you know about photography, forget what you know about filmmaking, forget what you know about exhibitions, and dream up your own scenario. There is so much conformity. Good coffee shops are interesting to me because they are democratic. You're going to expose that work to people who would not necessarily go to an art gallery. I'm not a huge fan of art galleries and photo galleries as much as I used to be because they seem very limiting to me. I've never really quite felt at home in that space. I go in and I feel like someone's watching me or they're sizing me up, determining whether or not they think I'm going to make a purchase or not. And so that's not my favorite way of exhibiting. I once saw the World Press Photo Organization exhibit their Pictures of the Year World Press Photo winners in the middle of the mall in Santa Monica. And they had warning signs up about graphic nature of the photographs, etc. And I loved it because it took that work, which would typically be exhibited in a museum and have a very limited exposure to the public, and all of a sudden it put it in a mall and it was fantastic. So that would be my advice, is use your budget wisely and use your budget in ways that most people wouldn't think of. I mean, think about point of purchase at the counter of a coffee shop. What if you had a piece of self-adhesive vinyl that was over the surface of where every single person is checking out? It would be impossible to miss that image. These are just one of many, many ideas that you can use to rethink what all of us have been trained to think about what we're supposed to do. All right, we are just flying through this. By the way, I am going to do a film about the van. But the point of the van is not the actual van that I bought and what the inside looks like and all the mods and all that stuff. Point of the van, it's like a camera. Where will the van allow me to go and what will it allow me to do? Those are the only things that matter. So I will do a van thing, but I'm gun shy of the whole van life thing because, again, like the phoniness creeped into it so fast. These people where you looked and you were like, oh, as a rabbit just went by. So a rabbit just went by, which means there's probably going to be a coyote that goes by right after, and then potentially either a mountain lion or a black bear. That's just the thing. So if you see me run and slide the door shut, you'll know what's happening. Okay, sequencing. This is from Eric. Help us learn this mysterious and dying art. I get it. I totally agree with you on that. I'm about to start a business in which I'll be doing a lot as each of my clients will get a magazine of the shoot. Great idea, Eric. I know what you're talking about now. We've emailed about this. I know Time and other great photo books will do, but I'd like to see a walkthrough of great photo book of one of yours since you know why you did what you did with the sequencing. I would never put my name and great photo book in the same sentence. I might put my name and interestingly flawed photo book in the same sentence, but I get where you're going. And I will do this. I have one book in particular that is a book about, I think I worked on it for 4 years. It was a project in Sicily about religion. It was during Easter in Sicily. They have these amazing processions. I started going there in the late 90s. I think I made 4 trips to Sicily. But anyway, there's about 50 pictures in the overall take. And I once used those at a portfolio review. They were static prints, so a box filled, and you open the box, and the first print had the title and the subtitle, and then you flipped over the print, and then it was an explanation of what the project was about, which was about religion in Sicily. And then you flipped over and you started through the photos. And I thought I had sequenced these masterfully. And I was showing them at a portfolio review. And I was showing them to a very, very highbrow photo editor who looked, and I realized very quickly had not paid attention to the title of the story or the subtitle or had read any of the explanation of what it was. And one of the first pictures in the box was of Sicilian Catholics wearing hoods that were participating in a religious procession. It had nothing to do with the kind of people who wear hoods in America, if you know what I mean. But the photo editor wasn't paying attention, and she saw the image and immediately got offended and slammed the book in my face and refused to look at it and stormed off. And yes, I could take offense at that from her perspective because she did not pay attention and she was acting kind of like spoiled. However, I took it as my fault because I led too soon with the wrong photograph. It was a strong photo. I really think it was a strong photo. I think it was one of the best photos I made. I realized that I had not given enough of the story before I gave that photograph, and it killed it and it blew up in my face. And so again, yes, I could fault her for not paying attention, but also it's my fault too. And that's the beauty of a sequence. It is a roller coaster. When you get on a roller coaster, they very rarely hit you with the drop right off the bat. They antagonize you, they terrorize you, and then they hit you with the drop. So that's what a good sequence will do. And I'm no expert on it. I know of people, and I've worked with people who are what I would call master editors, and also master sequencers and book designers. And when you work with them, you get a whole nother level of respect for people who spend their lives doing that. All right, next question. We are moving along. Hey, Daniel, it would be great if you could talk about how to promote selling prints or a magazine, especially through social media like Instagram. John, I'm sorry, I don't really have a lot of information about that. I think everyone else would, because pretty much every single human being I know seems to spend just enormous amount of time on Instagram. And I have not had an account for a long time, so I don't really know. I'm sure it's possible and people are doing it all the time. I still would prefer my own site. I do think someone like Craig Mott in Japan is a great person to look at, and I'm sure he is on Instagram. I don't know how it works into his system of delivery or marketing, but I'm not the right person to ask because I just don't want to be around those networks. Okay, I have a lot of basic questions about printing postcards. You've mentioned postcards, and I don't know if I've missed an instructional film, but a walkthrough would be helpful. Christian, so I love postcards too. I love getting them in the mail. I love sending them. I always have. I can remember going back to my first days of traveling abroad and sending postcards from remote places in the world, and it taking I'd be back from the trip by a month before they'd show up, kind of thing. So I don't have anything high-tech in particular. The one thing I would suggest is that I use a paper from a company called Hahnemühle, and Hahnemühle, or Hahnemühle, depending on how you pronounce it. I don't really know if that's how you pronounce it, but I think you'll find it based on my excellent pronunciation. And Hahnemühle makes postcard paper that comes in a metal tin. And I should have brought one. I have like 4 tins of these in the house. And the paper's beautiful. It's coated. It's got a little tooth to it. It's beautiful. And I do not use a fancy printer. I have a horrible all-in-one scanner, printer, whatever, that is not good. And it's really old. I can't believe it still works. And I buy like third-party black market ink, where sometimes the yellow ink could be blue. You just don't know, right? It's not a great system, but that's what I use to print my postcards, and it works, and it's super inexpensive, and it looks great. I do have a Canon Pro 1000 printer that I just turned on the other day. I hadn't turned it on since I moved to New Mexico, which is last summer sometime. I thought it would never work, and it did, and I will probably start making some larger prints at some point in the near future. But postcards are just, get that Hahnemühle paper and use whatever printer you have, and people will flip out when you send them these things. Hey Dan, having followed your earlier advice, Phil, that was probably not a good idea. I really value the testing approach with different styles, fonts, layouts, papers, and color accuracy. I did this with MagCloud and learned heaps. Are you Australian? Australians love that word, heaps. I like it too, but I like everything Australian, and I like everything Canadian. So, and if either of those countries are looking for a creative evangelist for a company based in one of those countries, I am all ears, baby. Okay, so let me get back to this, Phil. So recommend talking to this point again as part of the process. I think your question here is primarily about testing. And yes, I am 100% into testing. I'm getting ready to do another YouTube film, the series that I already have called Notes on Photography. I have another tack on that, which is called Notes on Layouts. And I think it's applicable and it's good because I don't have any training in page design, right? I studied photojournalism. We did one design class. I had to design a cover for The Last of the Mohicans with a T-square and tracing paper and press on type. So go look that stuff up. Go to the museum and look that stuff up. That was the only design I had. By the way, my cover of Last of the Mohicans was awesome. Imagine a grid pattern with boxes all empty except for the last one. Had a little Mohican like silhouette illustration of a Mohican Native American in there. That was my take on Last of the Mohicans, which by the way is a great book and a really good movie too. Anyway, testing is absolutely key. And one of the things that I do, which I'm going to make the film about, is that I will sometimes often just look at a single photograph. And the first example I'm going to do is an image from Paris. And I look at it and I just think to myself, how would I build a layout around that photo? And I open Blurb Bookright and I just start to play. And I typically do 3 takes on that image on one spread. So right page, left page, or depending on your point of view. I use copy, varying sizes of copy, sometimes captions, titles, subtitles. And I just give myself a challenge. And often what I'll do is I'll go back to the 70s or 80s or 90s. I'll look at things like fashion magazines. And I'll look at some of the design techniques they had, and then I'll co-opt them into the modern era, and I will just start to play. So I'll take sort of my own photojournalism style sensibility, I'll blend it with an 80s fashion idea, and I just mock up layouts, and then I save those layouts. I'll often do just a screen grab and save them into a folder so that if I get stuck on a project, I can often go back to those spreads and say, oh, this gives me an idea to move in a direction. Hopefully that helps. Not to blow my own horn, I think that was a really good piece of information I just gave you. You know how long it took me to figure out how to do that? A long time. And now I do it all the time. I'm a giver. I'm a giver, people. Okay, this is from Shyamal. Shamal? Okay, I hope I got remotely close. I've taken up several long-term projects with the goal of print as the final output. However, I find myself constantly evolving and the images taken at the latter part do not resemble in quality or characteristics to the photo shot during the initial phase of the project. How does one overcome this and create a cohesive body of work? On one side, I'm happy, I'm constantly learning and getting better. However, it does not help for a final output. First of all, that was a very well-written question. Let me just tip my hat to you in doing so. Very well written and a great question. It is a dilemma, and I'm not really sure what the solution is. I did a project once, or started it, a project on all the towns in America called Paradise. There are 12 of them in 12 different states. And I shot the first 5. I got in my old 4x4 and I drove around sleeping in the back of my truck, doing 5 of these towns. And I realized at the end of the 5th town that my work was simply not good enough, that I needed to start over. I decided to shoot that project with a Pentax 645. I don't know why I did that. That was a, a very poor choice of camera for that project. It was sort of a tweener camera. So it is medium format, and it's somewhat nimble, but the autofocus is slow and it's kind of limiting and the lenses were okay, but not really. I loved the camera, don't get me wrong, but it didn't work for that project. And I had a tough decision to make. I looked at the project and said, this is not good enough. And other people were telling me, you're out of your mind, you're out of your mind. This is a great start, keep going, keep going. And I knew deep down inside, if I felt that way about it already, I was gonna have to start over. So my point to you is you may not necessarily want to start over or have the capability to start over. So what you can think about doing is maybe doing separate books. You could do chapters, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and use that work from the first and show it and build it. Or you make tough decisions and you just say, I'm either going to reshoot what I did initially or I'm going to cut what I did initially. The good news is you're improving as a photographer. That's a serious deal. So again, the positive outweighs the negative. Best of luck. How long have we been going here? I'm going a long time. My phone's texting. That's another thing that drives me nuts. Everybody text. Hi, Dan. I've heard you talk about printing essays, even if it's just practice. Well, I want to do that with thousands of pictures I have on my hard drive. Any tips on creating a journal after, without having the journal in mind when taking the photos, even if it's just for practice? Unfortunately, my 3-week road trip got canceled. Was looking forward to this one in an essay. Thanks. Watching from Germany. I love Germany. I've only been there twice, I think, but I had a great time both times. I really like it there. Let me think about this. I had 3 major trips canceled between now and the end of the year. 2 were business-related trips, and they're all gone. They're dead. They're not happening, which, again, I'm totally fine with. I think we have to think of our culture as a collective now, not as individuals. And if I have to sit put here in the van in the driveway, I will do so. So I hope that things are going better for everyone in Germany. So a couple of things here. The journal can be a tricky, tricky, tricky thing to start. And I just spoke about this on another Q&A film I just did. Oftentimes, so much of what we do as photographers is intended for an audience, right? It's intended for a print audience, or you're on assignment and you're shooting for somebody specific, or it's the internet and you want praise, you want likes and subs and all these different things. All of a sudden you're dealing with something like this journal, a print piece that isn't for anyone except you. And oftentimes that can be staggeringly challenging to look at something and go, oh my God, this is all me. It's a blank canvas. There's no reward on the end of this. There's no direct reward. So I don't think there's a wrong way of doing this. I think you could literally just start making small prints and pasting them in, or you could start by writing. I like stream of consciousness writing, where you put yourself on a clock and just say, I'm going to write for 90 seconds and I'm going to write whatever comes into my head. No one else is ever going to see this. I'm never going to be judged. It's never going to be financially related. No one's going to give me a like or a sub or anything. And you just start and you start putting it in there. There's no right or wrong. You don't have to start at the first page of the journal. You can start in the middle. You can start in the back. You can jump around. There are no rules. How many things in life come with no rules? Not many, so take advantage of it. There's no wrong way to get from A to B with a journal. All right, I'm going to stop this and start it again because I'm paranoid. It's kind of risky doing this in the van because I haven't done anything in the van for quite some time, at least film related. And I'm just sitting here and wondering, I'm doing a formula, a deep, deep mathematical formula in my head about the odds of this being in focus. And I'm thinking it's about 48%, which was about like my average score in math through my entire life. Okay, what kinds of photos benefit from the various textures of paper, i.e. close-up portraits on a textured paper, cars on a premium gloss, etc.? This is from Zen. Zen, I think I'll go back to what I'd said earlier about testing and about the subjectivity of paper. It's really hard for me to give you specifics because it is such a personal thing. But I will tell you this. When I started using Blurb, in my head, I was shooting two things commercially at the time. I was still a full-time photographer. I was shooting reportage and I was shooting portraiture. And when I looked at the offerings at Blurb, I was in a hurry and I thought I was an expert and I was like, I don't need a swatch kit and I can figure this out. And I thought for sure that I would print my reportage on uncoated stock and my portraiture on the coated stock. And then I made a book. And I realized about a second and a half after opening the book that I had made the wrong decision. It should have been the opposite way. The reportage should have been on coated paper and the portraiture on uncoated. Not to mention, I should have opened up my portraits about a third to a half a stop because that was the look that I needed. And in my rush, I forgot to test. I was sort of arrogant in the sense that I'd been printing since the early 90s. I'd been making small books since the early 90s. And I just thought, oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to do this. And I didn't. And I just made the opposite decision. I just made that one mistake. And since that time, I've carried on in those traditions because it took a little bit of testing. One was not better. The portraits I wanted were lighter, brighter, and the coating of the paper, I didn't necessarily need super dark blacks. My reportage is about darkness, contrast, and grain. I'm not looking for grayscale. I don't want shadow detail. I need a paper that holds a lot of ink that has a super deep black, and the coated paper was my solution for that. Okay, moving forward, is there an efficient way to create a printed book that's also online or website friendly? I know there are ebooks and PDF routes, but anything else? Can I embed or link to a Blur book I've created? That's another good question, Brock. Digital books, digital illustrated books are sort of like a unicorn. When illustrated digital books first arrived, however many years ago, the thought was that all books would become illustrated digital books. And the problem was that no one bought them and no one wanted them and the sales were not good. And still to this day, no one really knows what to do with an illustrated digital book. In fact, when you look at illustrated digital books, oftentimes they're still designed as fake physical books, which I'm fine with. We all know right to left, turning pages. But some of the most creative photographers I've known that I've sat down with and we've looked at digital book applications, these are people that say, I don't want to go right to left. I want to go into the book and I want to dig down layers digitally and multimedia wise into these books and then be able to come out. I want choose your own ending, all these things. And the technology's not quite there yet. So with Blurb, if you use Blurb Bookright, you can do a digital book behind the scenes that's built automatically as you're building the physical copy. So that arrives as both a high-res PDF for I think $4. And then you can also buy a digital version of that book that's applicable for any of the iPad, iPhone kind of things. But a lot of people in the world use Android, so you're going to be limited on that side. I would try, at least design a book in Bookride on Blurb, and then get one and load it up on your iPad and see if you like it. I actually never thought I would use these, but I have used them quite a bit. But here is how I use digital books. I love movie trailers. I've always loved movie trailers. I think movie trailers are a high art in the cinema world because they show the skill of what a good editor can do. You can take a movie trailer and you can make a film, or you can break a film, and you can also take it in a million different directions. And I think digital books work really well as book trailers. I would never use a digital book as a replica of the physical book, because no one on the screen has the attention span to go all the way through the book. So I use very condensed, short, multimedia versions of that book. I'll add a little audio file. I'll add a few images. I'll add a little copy. I often do behind the scenes of what it took to do the project, and I just use them as trailers. And the only time I would ever show them is on an airplane. When I'm sitting with someone and they go, "Who are you? What do you do?" And you say, "I work for Blurb." And they're like, "What's that?" And the whole conversation begins and you're like, "Oh no, I just wanted to sit here quietly for the next 3 hours and this person won't stop talking." You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'll be like, "Oh, you can see sort of a trailer for the book right here," and I'll show them on the iPad. And then they're like, "Oh my God, you're amazing. You should win the Nobel Prize." And I'm like, no, really, really. And they're like, "Free drinks for this guy." Happens all the time. Okay, moving on. Thanks, Dan. I have 2 questions. All right, who did this? David. 2 questions. Greedy. Just kidding. I have 2 books printed by Blurb. Oh, this is really good. And I have, the color is slightly inconsistent despite the file being calibrated on my monitor on both occasions. Wow. Number 1, huge percentage of people do not calibrate, including pros, believe it or not. I've heard every excuse in the book for not calibrating is, I'll say, "What'd you calibrate with?" And people get really squirrely. It's not complicated. It's not hard. It's not expensive. Calibrate your monitor. Otherwise, you just do not know what you're looking at. The human eye is amazingly adaptive and can look at a screen that's 30 points cyan, and if you look at it long enough, it'll turn it into middle gray for you. Your eyes will. So calibrating is good. You're on the right thing. You use the same camera, the same lens, Sony a7R3, but not the same lens, and the paper stock also being the same. So the one change here was that your lens was different. That should not have that much of a difference. My question is, can I produce a test-proof print before finalizing my order? I mentioned this a little bit earlier. There's no way to print a section of a book. You've got to print a sample. But why not print if you're going to do a 12 by 12 book, why not do a 7/7 soft cover on the same paper and use that as your testing process and save yourself a boatload of money? Minimum file size. The second question, let me just address something earlier that you didn't ask about. Inconsistency. There will always be, well, hopefully not always, because maybe, we put a monkey in space a few years ago, so we should be able to figure this out. There's consistencies and inconsistencies in digital printing. There always has been, but they're getting better and better and better and better. Even from the time that Blurb started to now, the quality of digital printing, not just with Blurb, but with everyone, has gotten exponentially better. But you have to expect a little variance. The key is that things are in parameter and that you should have consistent results over time. I always expect that there's going to be a little change, but if there's too much change, that's when I would say, okay, there's something went wrong. I need to send this back and get a reprint kind of thing. Second question, as a guideline, what's the minimum file size? This is how I do this, and there's a million ways from A to B, and Blurb has a lot of really good technical information on the site, so you can find all kinds of minutia about this. This is how I break down the technical side of printing. And again, I'm ballparking this for everyone. Calibrate your monitor. The second part of that equation is consider your monitor density. If you're sitting in a room with your monitor brightness turned all the way up and it's driving all that light through that color, there is no way you're going to reproduce that, not just with Blurb, but with anyone. So if your monitor's jacked all the way up, that's not set correctly for pre-press conditions, and you're probably going to get images that are going to print dark, so you've got to keep density in mind. And the other thing is, whatever size book I'm making, if I'm doing a 10 by 10 and I'm shooting Hasselblad, I'll prep my files at 300 dpi at least 10 by 10. I typically err a little bit because I would rather use a larger image than have the software interpolate for me. 240 is fine as well in terms of DPI. I don't think you're going to be able to differentiate or distinguish between the two. And again, there's a lot of tech info on the Blurb side if you need any more than that. Okay, this is from Keith. I received my AG23. I think you're onto something. Thank you. That was one heck of a lot of work over a year. So a year plus of work. And just to throw a nod here. So I work full-time for Blurb, as you all know. And I've done a lot of projects over the years, collaborations with other companies and things like that. I've never had a collaboration partner like these guys. And that is driven by one person in particular who is their director, a guy named Rick Elder. The reason AG exists is the Beyond crew. That is a simple fact. Yes, I was involved in recruiting contributors, explaining, I've been helping sort of behind the scenes, but the financials behind how this came to be, we have to thank Beyond for that. And so we're working on issue 2 right now. Again, COVID has slowed everything down. It's made it very challenging. And also, I work full time, and Rick works. His job's even crazier than mine. So how he is able to pull any of this off, I don't know. I think potentially, and I'm almost, I would say 25% sure that he is potentially a cyborg. That is, there's rumors out there, and I've never seen him eat. And so that's another sign. Okay, thank you. You're onto something. I enjoyed the 34-minute video on film. God, was that 34 minutes? That's outrageous. I need an editor. My question is, with all the technical aspects you present in film labs you mentioned, it all seems that they only develop and scan. So the question is, are black and white prints made from digital scans the same as prints made directly from negatives, old school? Is the film look still retained in these prints? Is it silly to shoot film only to have it scanned? No, not at all. And Keith, most of the labs that I'm talking about, they also make prints. You also, to throw another wrinkle in here, you have labs like Digital Silver out of the East Coast, which takes light jet printer and uses a red laser to print on traditional photographic paper. So you have a digital silver image, and they are gorgeous. If I was doing an exhibition right now and shooting film, that's how I would print them. Also, inkjet printers definitely retain the look of the film. In fact, for a decade, I shot T-Max 3200. That was the only film I shot for all of my projects, and that film in the darkroom is a nightmare. Nightmare. But printed digitally, it is a dream. It looks so good. I would definitely recommend it. So it doesn't matter if you're scanning film and printing digitally, it still looks badass and is totally worth doing. This is another long one, Keith. I might break that 34-minute rule. I'm just going to keep going. I'm just going to live stream this for the rest of my adult life. Oh, this is another one from Ibrahim, although it's a little gray here, Ibrahim. Where to start from, question mark, and how often should I make prints? There's no hard set rule. That is 100% personal preference. I think the better you get at making prints, the more fun you're going to have with it. And you'll probably print more often, but you will be more selective about what you print because the cost will increase. This is one of the beauties of printing your photography that people often look at as a limitation, which is, oh my God, I have to pay for this. Trust me, when you are trying to show us your work, the rest of the human population loves the fact that you have to pay to print because it means you will edit your work at a higher level and then not subject the rest of us to galleries with 500 images. And Ibrahim, I'm not talking about you in particular. I'm talking about everybody. Printing, the cost of printing, just like film, the cost of using a roll of film, buying it, shooting it, shipping it, processing it, scanning it, printing it, it's expensive. So it makes you use your head. It makes you think. Printing is an elaboration of that, where you basically say, you look at an image, and I've done this many times. I've been in the dark room. I've put a negative in the enlarger. I've mixed the chemistry. I got my paper in the paper safe. I got the red light on. I am ready to go. And I turn on the enlarger, and I stare down at that image and realize it's not good enough to print. And you sit there cursing yourself, and then you take the negative out of the enlarger, and you pour the chemistry away, and you put everything away, and you go back in the field. That's the hard reality of being a photographer. You've spoken about a consistent look in a project, one lens, one format. But what if you happen to have a perfect image in a different format, i.e., 6x6 color, when everything else is 35 black and white? I have done that exact scenario. Would you manipulate it to conform or disregard the image for the edit? Ooh, Tim, that's a really good question. Knowing myself, and I have done exactly what you just said, because I would shoot 35 in the Leica, 2 Leicas, 2 lenses, 35 black and white, and then a Hasselblad with an 80 in color neg, Portra. And I did that all over the world. And there were times where I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I not committing to one format? But the Hasselblad was like a drug. The Hasselblad was easy. It made you feel like you were making progress. The 35 black and white is hard. It's not exotic. It doesn't look particularly any way in general. And you're just like, oh, it's not going to be good enough. I'm going to substitute with the Hasselblad. I can see it both ways. I can see just saying, look, even though that's a great image, I'm going to leave it out. I'll do a separate project with the color. But at the other time, you can justify anything as long as it works. And so I would do some testing. I would see where that image lands in the story, why. You could even have a disclaimer, an explanation, whatever. I wouldn't throw it away if it was that good. I would probably try to find a way to work it in. I've seen this go bad on a lot of people, and I've seen it work for a very small number of others. All right, we're going to keep going, and then I'm going to cut this off. Hello, Mr. Milner. Really enjoyed your book reviews. Regarding printing, I do as much as I can from Instax to A3 prints. I wanted to ask you about the difference between color and black and white. Is it true that color is better on glossy and black and white on matte? No, that's not really true. It could be for your individual project, style, or look. You may say, yes, my black and white looks better on coated stock, and my color looks better on uncoated, which is what I did with Blurb. But you can't make that blanket statement across the board. It just doesn't make sense, because the next photographer is going to say, well, I don't like coated paper. I only like uncoated, and I'm going to print everything. So it's impossible to make a blanket statement. I have various colors in photos in color and black and white for my travels and closer to home. How to choose them, how many photos from a given topic to print so that they're interesting and make sense, and what photos are worth printing, landscapes, portraits, or real life. And that's MACIEJ. What I love about YouTube is that it's such a global enterprise. It's nice to see names. I'm guessing maybe that's from the name from the Balkans, potentially. Am I wrong about that? Mashij, MACIEJ. Anyway, lots of questions in there. How to choose them. I would choose based on your aesthetic, your composition, the images that you think and feel are the best of the group, and I would get rid of everything else. And when I say get rid of, I don't mean throw away, I mean just move away so that they're in the outtakes pile and not in the selects pile. The number of photos is going to simply depend on how many good images you have. You don't ever want to substitute subpar images to get yourself to a certain image count. I would much rather have 8 really good images to work with than 8 good and 8 not so good, because I was trying to get to 16. I would just take the 8 best ones, because you do not want any fat in the story. If you have fat, your reader will depart the story. They just will not have the attention to get through it. You always want to use only your best images. And in terms of what images are worth printing, landscape, portraits, and real life, everything is worth printing if it's a good image that lends itself to the story. And remember, a portfolio is completely different from a book. A portfolio is a sample of your best images that could be across all genres, doesn't necessarily tell a story. A book has a narrative. A book has a story arc and a narrative, and that's the key. And it's not often made up of portfolio pictures. It's often made up of pictures that will help tell a story. All right, a couple more. Hey, Daniel, I would love to hear your thoughts on how to progress layouts when working on a long-term project. What's your workflow when laying out your photos and text when working towards your final product? So that's a great question, Azriel. It's a tricky one, too. The longer you're into the bookmaking process, the better you get at it, the more it can creep into your brain while you're in the field. I have done projects where by the time I left the field, the layout was already in my head for the entire book, spread by spread. That is not necessarily a good thing. Maybe I'm a savant. Doubtful, but I'll throw it out there. But I would shoot, and I'd done this so many times that in my head I was like, oh, that's a horizontal, I'm going to have copy block, I got this, these 2 squares, doing this, and then you get done. The problem was when you sit down to edit, there's always going to be changes, revisions, corrections, etc. And sometimes it would like not jive with what was going on in my head. So I think the best thing to do is to focus 100% in the field on making the best possible photographs you can. That is the singular most important thing on the front end of the project. When you're done on the back, I like to make small prints of all the best images, small, and then start laying them out and sequencing them on a table. I will lay them out and I will slowly start to build the sequence in small prints. And again, making the small prints is forcing me to spend money and make decisions about my work. Making small prints forces me to apply critical thought to what is the best work that I have, make the small prints, lay them out, and then I start to translate from those physical prints into the software, whether it's InDesign, plugin, Bookright, PDF uploader, sometimes Lightroom if I want to go that route. So and then I just start to play and work. I get second opinions from people that I respect, people that are far better at this stuff than I am. If I have time and if it's a book that I'm trying to put out into the world to say something with, and I want to make sure that it's good. A lot of times I'm just making books for me. It doesn't really matter. I take chances, I experiment, I print the book, I get it, I go, I like this, and I move on. All right, almost done. Super appreciate that you take the time for questions. Can you elaborate on your journaling process and how it integrates into your printing? Yeah, so I use the journal every day. I write in it every day. I posted photos in it today. Some of the worst photos I've ever made, and probably some of the ugliest photos I've ever made. This was sort of the spread from today. And these are like Fuji Instax, and for some reason they have this bizarre colored frames. Terrible. But I love it anyway. And I just write whatever comes into my head. I very rarely do like a step-by-step of what happened during the day. I'm typically writing about what's happening, those thoughts rattling around in my brain. I often will sketch layouts as well. I'll have an idea for maybe how I want to lay things out on a page, and I'll sketch it in there. I take a lot of notes in the field. I studied journalism, so when I'm in the field shooting, I'm constantly making observations and writing them down, because if you think you are going to remember these details later, you're kidding yourself. You won't. And so small observations of what I'm seeing that I then work into the copy that accompanies the photographs when I'm trying to do a book or narrative or magazine along those lines. All right. I think we're going to cut it off there. There are quite a few more pages left here, and I think this has gone on long enough. I will come back with a second episode of print questions. These are all really good. They're questions that I see on a regular basis, and I think what they represent are roadblocks. And that's my goal with the series, is to get you past roadblocks, whether you are printing with Blurb or MagCloud or whoever else you want to print with. I think these questions apply, and if I can help you get through a roadblock, things are good. So I will be back.